The normalization of relations between the U.S. and Cuba is one big step closer tonight. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen reports on the removal of Cuba from an infamous list.
One day after President Obama honored Cuban Americans with a visit to the Shrine of Our Lady of Charity in Miami, his aides announced the end to Cuba's 33-year residency on the State Department list of nations that sponsor terrorism. The move paves the way for the reopening of embassies, although the White House cautioned that is not a done deal.
In the discussions that were convened last week, there was important progress that was made.
Congress had 45 days to challenge the delisting, but did not act. Last month, Secretary of State John Kerry certified that Cuba has not supported terrorism for at least 6 months, and he secured Havana's written assurances it will not do so going forward. One consequence is that the U.S. will no longer automatically move to block loans to Cuba from the World Bank or IMF.
Separately, there are the Cuban assets control regulations, and those will continue to prohibit most transactions involving Cuba or a Cuban national.
Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, a likely Republican presidential candidate, called today's news further evidence that President Obama seems more interested in capitulating to our adversaries than in confronting them. Iran's leaders are surely taking note, unquote. Another likely GOP contender blasting the decision was New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who demands that Cuba return Joanne Chesimard, the black radical who killed a New Jersey trooper in 1973, later escaped from prison, and has lived freely in Cuba for 3 decades.
This is a travesty, unconscionable.
Joe Connor has likewise demanded Cuba turn over another fugitive from American justice, Guillermo Morales, once the chief bomb maker for FALN, the militant Puerto Rican group that terrorized New York in the 1970s, including a Manhattan bombing 40 years ago that killed Joe's father Frank and 3 others.
How can this administration remove Cuba from the state-sponsored terrorists list when they've been sponsoring terrorists as a state for over 40 years? Harboring Morales and Chesimard in Cuba means they're being sponsored by Cuba. There is no other way they can live in Cuba.
State Department officials say the remaining obstacles to the reopening of embassies could conceivably be worked out between the 2 countries' interest sections without the need for another formal round of talks. But the Congress could conceivably intervene, perhaps by defunding the operations of such an embassy or by blocking the nomination of an ambassador. Brett?
James Rosen live on Capitol Hill. James, thank you.